Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're tackling something, pretty fundamental to just about everything. Freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. We'll be looking at this youth advocacy toolkit. But don't worry, it's not just for teenagers or anything. The core principles they cover, they're definitely for everyone. Ready to unpack some serious rights.
Always up for exploring these foundational concepts.
Okay, cool. So the toolkit kicks off by saying everyone has the right to freedom of thought on all matters. Sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even obvious, right?
Yeah.
But I have a feeling there's more to it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's not just about what's, inside your head. It's also about the freedom to, form your own personal convictions, whether or not you want to, follow a certain religion or belief system.
Right.
And crucially, to be able to express those beliefs openly, kind of like, the freedom to figure out your own path, your own beliefs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now this is where things get a little bit interesting. The toolkit uses this very specific wording. Quote, manifest such religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching.
Yeah.
But it's not just about what you think, but how you live it out.
Exactly. So let's say you believe in a certain, religion or philosophy. This right means that you can express those beliefs through worship, observance, or teaching. And you can do this individually or with others and in public or private. It's really all about being able to live in accordance with your convictions.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So the toolkit then brings up this thing called, conscientious objection.
Right.
And they use the example of refusing military service. And I can already see how this can get complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Think about it. Let's say you're deeply opposed to violence, but your country requires, mandatory military service. That's exactly where conscientious objection comes in your right to act according to your deeply held beliefs, even if it means going against, what society expects.
Yeah. Wow. I see. That's a really powerful example of how personal beliefs can really clash with societal norms. What's interesting is that the toolkit also connects this right to freedom of opinion and expression. So I'm curious, are those connected? Are those all interwoven in some way?
They're completely intertwined. If you have the freedom to think for yourself, that naturally leads to forming your own opinions. And of course, then wanting to express them. It's a natural progression, one right leading into the next.
And when those rights work in harmony, it creates, an awesome space for open dialogue and the exchange of ideas. So that's definitely something worth protecting.
Absolutely. And I think it creates a dynamic where, even disagreements can be productive because they stem from this foundation of mutual respect for individual freedoms.
Yeah. It's interesting that this toolkit is specifically aimed at young people, but it feels like, these rights are universal, right? It applies to everyone, regardless of how old you are.
For sure. I think understanding these rights is crucial for all of us. But yeah, especially important for young people who are, still figuring out their own belief system, trying to navigate this world, which is getting more complex all the time.
It's like, yeah, they're being handed a toolkit, literally, to build their own internal compass and confidently make their own choices.
Yeah, exactly. They're being empowered to, to think critically, to question assumptions, and to form their own opinions, rather than just accepting what they're told at face value.
That's so important, especially today with all the information overload we see. But, okay, let's zoom out for a second. Why should anyone care about these rights? I mean, sometimes they feel a little abstract,
They might seem abstract on the surface, but they have a very real impact on our daily lives. Think about it. Freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. These shape how we interact with the world around us, how we make decisions, how we engage with people who, hold different beliefs.
It's about being your authentic self without being persecuted or judged for it.
Exactly. And in a world that's, becoming increasingly polarized, the ability to think critically and independently is more important than ever. Having the ability to question, to explore different viewpoints, and ultimately to form your own conclusions.
Yeah, and equally important is respecting the right of others to do the same, even if their beliefs are totally different from our own. And I think that's where tolerance and understanding come into play.
Absolutely. A society where everyone is forced to think and believe the same things would not only be unsustainable, but incredibly boring.
Right. Talk about a recipe for stagnation. Diversity of thought is what makes life interesting, what fuels progress and innovation.
Totally. It's the engine of creativity and critical thinking. And without it, we'd be stuck in an echo chamber all the time.
So let's bring this back to our listener. We've covered a lot today, exploring, these fundamental rights and how they play out in the real world. As we wrap up, though, there's a question I want to leave you with. Something to think about. Something to spark further thought.
A challenge to consider how these principles might change and evolve in our, constantly changing world.
Exactly. So we talked about how important these rights are, but the world is changing so rapidly,
Right.
especially with, the rise of the digital age and social media. So the real question is, how do these fundamental rights, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, how do these play out in this new digital landscape?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes you think. Does the online world, create new challenges for these rights? Or maybe new opportunities? I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, on the one hand, you have the internet, which has really opened up, so many avenues for getting information and connecting with people who have different perspectives, literally from all over the world. You could almost say it's like a, breeding ground for freedom of thought and expression.
Yeah, like a giant global town square where anyone can share their ideas and join discussions. But there's a darker side too, right? Like all the echo chambers, online harassment,
Hmm.
the misinformation that spreads so easily. It's like these freedoms are being weaponized or something.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's kind of like, yeah, double-edged sword. The internet has this incredible potential for open dialogue and critical thinking, but it also creates these new challenges to these, really fundamental rights. So we need to think critically about how we can navigate, this complex online world and make sure these freedoms are protected.
So how do we strike that balance? How do we make sure that freedom of thought, conscience, and religion can actually thrive online without being overshadowed by all the negative stuff?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's
Mhm.
definitely a challenge. I think it requires a multifaceted approach. I think first we need to help people, especially young people, develop the critical thinking skills they need to tell the difference between, real information and fake news, to be able to recognize a difference between, someone genuinely expressing their beliefs and harmful speech that's just pretending to be free speech.
Yeah, it's like we need to add a whole new set of tools to that toolkit we were talking about. Tools just for navigating the online world.
Yeah, exactly. But beyond, individual responsibility, we also have to think about the role of platforms and policymakers. What kind of policies are they putting in place to moderate content, combat harassment, and, promote digital literacy?
It sounds like protecting these rights in this new digital age is going to take a team effort. Like everyone needs to take responsibility.
Absolutely. It's a complicated issue, and there are no easy answers. But it's a conversation we need to keep having. The digital world is playing a bigger and bigger role in shaping how we think, how we interact, and how we see the world. So what happens online really matters.
Yeah, totally. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, I think the key takeaway is that these rights, they're not just something you read about in a textbook. They are really important in our everyday lives, and we need to protect them, especially as we navigate this ever-changing digital world.
Couldn't agree more. They are fundamental to a free and open society, online and off. They're definitely worth fighting for, worth protecting, and worth thinking about as the world changes around us.
So to our listeners, we'll leave you with this. How can you stand up for these rights in your own lives? How can you help create a digital space that allows open dialogue, respects everyone's perspective, and upholds the freedoms that let us think, believe, and express ourselves without fear? Think about those questions when you're online, having discussions, or just exploring all the complexities of these human rights. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep thinking critically, and keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and remember, your thoughts, your conscience, and your beliefs, they all matter. Protecting these freedoms is key to building a future where everyone can thrive and create a more just and vibrant world.
And that's it for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.